Okay, well then, moving on, we did question 9 already, and there's question 10, 11, 12, and 13, all moved by young Daniel Stride. I think we could probably go one by one, have him come up and talk about each motion and why he's put them forward. I'd like to welcome Dan up here. Firstly, for should OUSA adopt the following motion, that OUSA opposes any attempts to remove neurosurgery services from Dunedin as external policy. Dan?
Okay, if you've been reading the ODT in recent times, you'll have noticed that the issue about whether neurosurgery in the South Island should be centralised in Christchurch is a major issue at the moment. And I think, as you're probably aware, that this would actually have some if it was to be moved out of Dunedin, it would have some very dangerous long-run consequences for Dunedin. It would undermine the medical school, and that in turn would take with it the integrity of the university. So basically, it's very, very important that we basically, at OUSA, joins the generalised voice across Otago and Southland in favour of keeping neurosurgery in Dunedin.
Great. Is there anyone that would like to speak to neurosurgery leaving Dunedin? If not, I'll move on to question 11. Dan, should OUSA adopt the following motion, that OUSA opposes the current changes in student loan allowance criteria announced by Tertiary Education Minister Stephen Joyce on the grounds that the changes would unfairly inhibit access to tertiary education?
Okay, again, this is a reference to the recent student loan changes, basically booting people out if they, booting people out for retrospective performance. It also boots people out after completing 7 Fs of full-time study. Now, I think you can realise that there's a small problem there in the sense that, at least with 7 Fs, you are basically saying, doesn't matter what your results are, just get a degree, get out. That is totally against the notion that universities exist as a place for learning. To borrow it really, all this policy will do, basically, is penalise people who actually want to do multiple undergraduate degrees. If you want to change their mind halfway through a degree and want to switch things, the message that these student allowance and loan changes sends is that basically, the government does not care about tertiary education. It's a case of get in, get your bit of paper, get out. That's not what the university should be about.
Would anyone like to discuss the negative of this question? Ashley.
Are you talking about people who actually fail? Are you talking about people who fail, or? Okay, well, the university, of course, actually has rules regarding performance anyway, quite independent of whether you can get a loan or not. In terms of the wider social thing, it is important to remember that universities are not simply things that produce jobs. That is a part of it, but they are far, far more than that. They are also the critic and conscience of society. They also provide an opportunity for lifetime learning, and I do believe that's important to be maintained. It's still learning.
Good argument. Would anyone else like to ask a question about this or speak to the negative? Thank you.
Just a question for you. Just if you could clarify something for me. If OUSA puts this policy in place, doesn't it actually go directly against what NZUSA has said in regards to that they're not going to fight these changes? Isn't that coming from the students?
Well, of course, we have completely free rein to set student policy as we see fit, regardless of what NZUSA says. If NZUSA is not fighting this, that's their problem. We are, however, put in the statement that we are simply opposing the change. Well, it is out there. We're putting the point that we are opposing it. If NZU doesn't want to fight it, that's their problem.
Thank you. Well, if there's nothing else on that point, moving on to question 12. Should OUSA adopt the following motion, that OUSA is opposed to any increase in the goods and service tax, GST, on the grounds that such an increase disproportionately hurts students and other people on fixed incomes.
Okay, I will just walk you through this quickly. As you may be aware, students are in a situation of most of us have to borrow to live. The increase in GST has meant that the increase in basically stuff that we need to pay to live, stuff like rent and what have you, is it will go up in price. That hurts us basically. Because the thing to remember about GST, the effect of it is regressive. People on lower incomes, on fixed incomes, spend a greater proportion of their money on stuff like food, power, what have you, because they have no choice. You cannot cut your own spending beyond the level you actually need to survive. Basically, you're in a situation of poor people having to pay a greater proportion of their income on GST than richer people, which I think is inequitable, and also and because students are the people on low and fixed incomes, it will ultimately hurt students.
Well said, Dan. Are there any questions? Will.
I've just got a question about the GST rise, and it's a case, OUSA's opposition to it. It's a case of if we oppose the GST rise, then how's the government supposed to pay for the tax cuts which they've implemented? Would we be opposing those tax cuts as well? Because there'll be a benefit for students in that regard.
Well, quite frankly, I think it's the government's own damn fault for borrowing to fund tax cuts on rich people.
James.
Just on your point of borrowing to fund things, Dan, do you know what the current levels of borrowing are and where the borrowing came from?
You mean as of the way the government funds its deficit?
Yes, and why does the government have a deficit?
Well, it would be having a deficit anyway, basically due to the economic circumstances which we find ourselves in. However, cutting taxes on the wealthy provides very, very, very little stimulus effect. Basically, putting on my Keynesian economic hat for a moment, it would be far, far better if the government was spending it on infrastructure rather than tax cuts for the rich.
Dan, are you aware that the bottom tax bracket has been cut from 12.5% to 10.5%? And if you are you implying that people in that tax bracket are wealthy? And if not, why not?
James, you know full well that tax cuts of a minuscule amount of dollars a week will be cancelled out by the GST. The only people who benefit from this tax cuts are the people on higher incomes.
More questions? No. Yes. Here, down front and then Stephen.
Just a little technical point, just because I can be an arsehole. GST rise is not regressive, it's actually a flatline tax which affects everyone at the same rate. It's actually the marginal propensity to consume for poor people which increases, yet their marginal propensity to save as well decreases.
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. GST is a flat tax. Basically, the point I'm making is that its effects are regressive, not as itself. I take your point though. Yeah, sorry about not making it clear.
If you could pass it on to Stephen.
James, 2.2% increase in GST is the inflationary effect of the increase in GST. The bottom tax rate has been reduced by 2%. The top tax rate, the top marginal tax rate has been reduced by 5%. It would seem to me that wealthy people are getting more than people on lower incomes. And the marginal propensity to consume argument is a superb one in terms of backing up what Dan said, that people on lower incomes do tend to consume rather than have the ability to save.
Oh, this is great. You can come to these things, have fun, and learn. So if there's any other points or questions, speak now. Otherwise, we can move on to the last question of the day. Last question of the day. Megan. We'll let him speak to it first, and then we'll let you. Lucky 13.